Here to lead our panel on breathing new life into existing content is Kris Vetter-Tomes. Kris Vetter-Tomes is the digital production coordinator for children's publisher Learner Publishing Group, where she focuses on best practices in print and digital workflow, creation of digital book products, and repurposing existing content. Kris is also a freelance ebook developer for publishers throughout North America.
Right next to me here is Jordan Bass. He is a former executive editor and current editor-at-large at Mixweenie's Publishing, where he's helped to edit and design dozens of books, both fiction and nonfiction, since 2004. Next to him is Franco Alvarado. He is an ebook developer and print book designer and the project manager of Reference Works at Brill, based in Boston. Or no, you're in Boston, based in Netherlands. Previously, Franco worked at F&W Media, developing Adams Media's CMS Workflow, optimized for content licensing and repurposing. He has also led the production teams at several literary magazines, most recently, Strangelit, which is sci-fi fantasy. Next, we have Rachel DeSalle, and she is a senior manager for content governance at Rogers Media, where she has worked with content brands like Maclean's, Chatelaine, Today's Parent, MoneySense, and Canadian Business to leverage evergreen content for ebook programs and digitization projects. With a background in ebook production, book design, prepress, and web design, she has almost 20 years of experience in the publishing industry and has consulted with some of Canada's top publishers to develop best practices for multi-platform publishing. And at the very end there is Veronica Thompson. She's manager of the design studio at Inkling, where she and her team create bespoke, responsive web templates for Inkling's customers and help make content look great at scale. Before Inkling, Veronica was a design fellow at Chronicle Books. In her spare time, you can find her running a lifestyle blog and making many, many paper flowers. We like to keep this pretty casual as a discussion, so if you guys have questions during, feel free to speak up, use the microphone so they can catch it on the recording. So hi, guys. Hi. How do you guys repurpose content within your own companies? And Veronica, I'm going to pick on you.
All right.
Go for it.
So at Inkling, we faced a challenge where one of our publishers came to us and said, we really need a way to create courses which just pull from books. We don't want to have someone sit there and curate a special book for someone who needs more help versus someone they've got it, they're going, and they really want to kind of move at a faster clip. So they were trying to accommodate different styles of learners, essentially. And so we took it as an in-house project, and we actually built a really interesting prototype that would curate and pull chapters from a variety of books. You could even cross genres. So we were working with textbooks at the time. And it was you might be working on biology, but realize you need a little biochem help. And so it would say, oh, you really need to work on this section here, so we're just going to pop that into your book, and you're going to have to read that next, and then take an assessment to kind of prove that you did it. And that let us draw from many books across a whole library of content. And in the end, it also required an algorithm, which I'm probably going to bring up again later. But it was a really fun and sophisticated project where we got to see how it was actually looking at content in a totally different way and breaking it out into discrete pieces. And I think actually replicating in some ways what a CMS does, but not with the metadata. I'm turning that over to you, Franco.
Yeah, go for it, Franco.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
So at F&W, we had a CMS-based workflow. And so what that allowed us to do was leverage a lot of the sort of recipe content that F&W owned outright and repurpose that and feed that to third parties. So they had a deal with the Kroger grocery chain, and so they would push the recipe content to them, and so it was a really good way to leverage the things that they already had and finding a different source of revenue for the content that was already in there that wasn't just, putting it in a print book or an ebook or something like that. And then aside from that, the other content repurposing I did at Adams was ebook bundles. So it was not like a sophisticated CMS workflow or anything like that. It was like literally taking EPUBs and then ripping them apart and putting them together, just like 10 ebooks into one. It's not fun, but they sold very well.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'll go
go
next.
I didn't have a good segue.
So, like Kris said, I work at Rogers, so that's a lot of magazine content. So we've done everything from packaging ebooks for recipe content, parenting content. We've created a lot of content-based apps. Recently, we've been working on a project with the McLean's archive, so that dates back to 1905. So we've gone back and scanned that magazine all the way back to its originating publication, and that's had a lot of value for us. We repurpose it in two ways. So we have a portal, which is a value add for subscribers who go to the website, and they can access any spread of any magazine published all the way back, like I said, to 1905. It's mobile friendly. And the other way we utilize that archive is we've ingested it into our digital asset management system, which means people internally on the McLean's team can license that content. So we just sold a cover to Condé Nast. We repurpose that content internally across other brands. So, if someone at Sportsnet wants to see an article done on Gordie Howe, they can grab that and publish that as well. So yeah, those are sort of the big bucket pieces that we've done. We've also published ebooks for longer form journalism. So when a journalist publishes an article in a print mag and they don't quite have the word count to fit, they'll publish an ebook with that longer form piece in there.
All right. Well, Mixweenie's, I would say, takes what you could call a much more artisanal approach. We did get onto Dropbox a couple of years ago, which was pretty big for our team. I think we got a mobile-friendly website last year. But I think because of the way a lot of our projects and the way traditionally the company was structured, it turned out to be pretty tough to break things into their component parts and reassemble them. So when we did do it, it was really kind of a scratch baking process. And we were able to do some interesting things with that, but the era of automation is still somewhere in the future. I feel like listening to you guys it's exciting and stimulating. And I feel like Mixweenie is maybe still in like the mosquito and the amber phase at the beginning of Jurassic Park, like before the DNA has been extracted and recombined to make tremendous new creatures. But I'm hopeful that we'll get there.
I have a couple examples. I'm going to start a little low tech. One of Lerner's imprints, our Jewish imprint, Carben, has a very famous within its niche, famous character called Sammy Spider, and he's a multicolored spider made out of geometric shapes, and he is in lots of books about Jewish holidays and explaining things about that religion, and it was aimed for about 3rd and 4th graders. And we decided a couple of years ago that because we have so much artwork of the spider and we have so many years worth of books that we could repurpose these images and these texts down to the board book level, so like pre-K through 1, and make new books without spending money on art and things like that, and also giving an earlier opening to those pieces of content. So that one's been very successful. We also, in a bit of a backwards way, instead of starting with audiobooks, we started with fixed layout EPUBs with smile files for synchronized text highlighting and audio. So we hired several audio houses to record audio files for us. And we had these products, and they were selling pretty well. Not as many venues hosted them as we would liked. And it occurred to me just last winter, well, hey, we have hundreds of these titles with audio files in them, but we don't have audiobooks of them. We could just pull all of that audio out of those books and create audiobooks. So that took only about a year to strip all of it out. I think it was about 750 titles. And we launched our audiobook line in January. And that one so far has been very successful, especially with the uptick in audiobook sales as a trend in general. So I guess I should have defined what I meant by content for repurposing content for this panel, so I'll do it now. I may have a broader definition than other people. Obviously, text and images, audio and visual, video, but I also consider code as content in a way. So we have this product that is called Interactive Books, which is a browser-based interactive book experience for elementary school kids. And we realized that the company that was creating these digital products for us, that the files could be stripped down into the previous product I already talked about, which was a fixed layout EPUB with audio and text highlighting synced together. So over the past couple of months, we've been working on a script to strip out content from one of them, or strip out code from one of them to turn them into the other product. So instead of paying to have all of those titles created now, we just pay for the interactive book, and then we use our script to make the other one, and then we strip out the audio and make our standard fixed layout EPUB. So it has streamlined everything really well, and different people prefer reading with different experiences, so we can hit all three of those. So that's been very successful so far as well. All right, I'm going to go on to question 2. How do you and your company repurpose content externally outside of your company with partnerships with other companies, with the government? I'm going to start with Veronica again, if you don't mind.
All right. Well, something that's occurring to me actually as we all talk is some things are just inherently easier to repurpose, right? Like a video, for example, is made to be self-contained, or typically made to be self-contained. And one of the things we've helped our customers do is we'll actually look at their content with them and then make recommendations for isolating specific pieces. For example, as you become more granular, if you're trying to repurpose a chapter, that's actually pretty easy because a chapter has a beginning and an end. As we work down to like the paragraph level, it gets a lot harder because you have to write that paragraph to stand alone. And then you get a very disjointed reading experience if every paragraph stands alone. So a lot of what we've done externally is both, we have content strategists who actually sit there and map the content and the kind of ideal end state with our customers, publishers and actually non-publishers alike, and help them create an actual content map so that they understand this chapter needs to touch these 3 books. How can I author this chapter again to make this into something usable and compelling across 3 titles? Or sometimes we get down to the paragraph, even sentence level. I would not recommend sentences for anyone who's considering it. And there's, like we help them weigh the balance, right? Of, okay, you can't do this for every paragraph on this page, but maybe the intro is actually really easily pulled in and out. So there are those pieces. We've also, our platform will actually let people isolate those chunks of content and then pull them in and out of different books based on a template. So let's say you have a chemistry template. Can you tell I live in the textbook world? I did 800 medical titles for my first stint at Inkling, and let me tell you, I saw the most disturbing things ever. We actually built a web plugin to cover up the images eventually. But
Was it the Nick Cage fill-in one?
it was, it just did a 4-pixel blur so that we just wouldn't see it. And what we've done is we've kind of enabled our customers to take that content map and then turn it into a template, essentially, that they can carry throughout a whole genre of books. So they might have a different template for chemistry books than they would from English books, for example, because you probably don't need to reuse a paragraph or a chapter from chemistry in English. But it's been actually a really exciting challenge and takes a lot of brain power just to figure out how that all maps together. But I love seeing it. It's actually really fun to watch people hit these light bulb moments of, oh, wait, we could use that here. Or what if we use this in this book? I never would have thought we would want a chapter on how animals have homeostasis in some species. So it's been really fun for us, actually. Don't know how to transition that way.
I'm going to harass you a little more.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about partnerships you've had in maybe a non-traditional, like, publishing area?
Yeah, so actually I would say this trend of repurposing content exists far beyond publishing, actually. This is one of the predominant things we run into with our non-publisher partners, whether that's an overseas vendor or because they're always looking for time savings, right? So if they can reuse something they've done before, they're very interested in it. Or I work with like fast food chains on their standard operating procedures. Sounds really boring to most of us, but sometimes you need to plug and play a different piece in a different book. That's actually been a unifying factor across all of our customers. And we never actually saw that coming. We knew publishers were interested in it. And then we're shocked when the rest of the world was like, actually, yeah, what are you doing for that? Because we would really like to do that too. So it's definitely kept us on the edge of our seats for repurposable content. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I just brings to mind Kroger, the grocery chain, wanted Adams's recipe content. And when we were sending them the feed, the XML feed for that content, they kept coming back to us and saying, like, we need this metadata tag, and then we started having to have, all of the editors, sort of go back and backfill all of this information. And that sort of lends that content to even further reuse. And when you get down to that metadata level, you start describing things more and more, and you get more value out of that because you're defining it in different ways that might be applicable to other companies that, things you might not even think of later, But yeah, a lot of back and forth on that. And they were also very adamant about having images because a lot of the cookbooks that Adams had at the time just didn't have images at all. And so, a lot of searching for stock photography and things like that. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I think we've gone through similar experiences. And one of the projects I've been working on over the past couple of years is focused both on metadata and content centralization. How you pull all of your content into one repository so that you can surface it easily when you are trying to repurpose. It makes it a whole lot easier to do that. Right now, we have article content coming into that repository, and there are great services out there. I was telling these guys earlier in the green room, we use a tool called Luxid, which uses intelligence to read an article or any text file, and you build a thesaurus, and it applies that automatically. So you don't have editors or content creators spending their time trying to tag content in order to be able to find it later. It does this for you automatically. We also are looking to use this with image content. So we have multiple brands purchasing stock photography. We have in-house photographers, and our agreements and ownership of that content states we can do whatever we want with it because we own it outright. But in order to surface it and reuse it and repurpose it, we're also looking at services that can look at an image and auto tag it. So Adobe has cloud services that do that. Google has cloud services that do this. They're just very intelligent and graceful ways to get your content into a place where you can find it again, because that is so often the case with legacy content. You want to do something, you know it's somewhere on a drive, someone's computer. I mean, that is the battle I fight almost every day, is trying to get that computer off of someone's, or get that content off someone's computer and into a centralized location. And once you do that, you can, we're starting to do this now where, you know, you have a centralized repository and you can start using that as a point for distribution. So we're hoping to look at facilitating things like we have feeds out to MSN and Yahoo. We send a Maclean's feed out to the federal government for their employees to review on a daily basis. So to facilitate that kind of, you know, that automation, so you can get your content out there and not spend so much time looking for it and more time creating it and being creative about it.
Oh, sorry, good. I saw you.
I can jump in, but
Yeah.
please, if you want to bounce off of that.
I do think what's really interesting to me, and this is kind of something that we've suspected but we're one group, right? Is when working with external partners, being as consistent and consolidated as possible suddenly becomes the most important thing. It's front-loaded, right? Like, you have to do all that work up front. But it makes it easier to go to, for example, like Kroger and say, hey, Kroger, yes, we have this set of metadata. We're willing to add, you know, you have all of a sudden kind of a united front and negotiating power almost, because you've actually set up everything. It's already there. And you can give people the tools to look for content, to find everything related to a specific tag that's used consistently across the board, which is something I'd never really heard articulated, but is fun to hear come up in this conversation across.
Yeah, and I would just say to that, metadata is a beautiful thing, because not only does it describe your content or help it in the supply chain, but you can also use metadata to be programmatic about things. So if you've tagged content with a certain tag, and you can then programmatically tell it to do something in an automatic fashion, which means you can move your content, manipulate your content in ways that don't require that manual work.
Yeah, I think that front-end work was exactly the challenge for Mixweenie's for a long time, and the partnerships helped quite a bit with that. You know, because our staff was so minuscule and our resources were so limited, really we were making sort of either-or choices most of the time between pursuing a new project and looking to extend the lifespan or the reach or the audience of an existing project. And I think institutionally we were pretty biased toward jumping onto the next thing and trying something new and almost sort of self-cannibalizing that energy in a way. And that's definitely shifted a little bit in the last couple of years. We have an ongoing partnership with Audible now that has unlocked a lot of existing work from our periodicals. I worked on our short fiction quarterly primarily for many years, and a lot of that work came out once in hardcover or an even less accessible format in a cigar box or something like that. I don't know if folks here have seen Mixweenie's. It's sort of deliberately difficult to stock and distribute and access. It's a, unconventional business strategy. And we were able to go back to a lot of those writers finally, whose stories had maybe never appeared in any other form, had never appeared in a digital edition or paperback or anything like that, and offer them this funny kind of second life on an audio platform, which has been interesting to see what we can go back and recover now that we have a partnership that allows us to do some of that front end work. And understand Audible's metadata needs and give everything BSEC codes, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it's been a good and useful challenge for us, I think, to see what kind of possibilities are there, even in our very sort of idiosyncratic little corner of the world.
Did you tell me the other day about another partnership or another project that Mixweenie's had worked on?
Yes, so this is probably an even less instructive example. But so the other thing that came to mind when I was thinking about this panel and thinking about coming out here was a project that was certainly illuminating for me in terms of that movement from a very restrictive, perhaps purpose-built, perhaps anti-purpose-built format into an incarnation with a little bit of a broader reach. So I think what you're talking about is a book we did with Beck a few years ago, where he had an idea for many years to release a record album entirely in sheet music form. And every publisher loves sheet music. It's the hottest thing in town, as you guys all know. But it was an idea that Mixweenie's was very excited about, and we sort of talked to him over a decade or so, as one does, to sort of flesh this out as he was bouncing between other projects. And eventually we were able to release this lovely, strange book-like thing. It was sort of a folder with these individual song sheets inside of it that you could take home and learn how to play Now Your Dollar Bills Have Sprouted Wings on your piano and sing to your family. And it was great, and we really thought that would be the end of it, since that is sort of where many of these stranger projects land. They sort of come out in this almost confrontational, counterintuitive form, and then we leave them there and sort of dash off anxiously to try something else. But the wonderful thing that happened with that project, I really wish I could sort of abstract this into some lesson for publishing, but I don't know if I can. But what we had managed to do through no luck of our own was sort of passively wait to publish this project until YouTube had been created, which sort of allowed for this entire new and unexpected level of interaction with this sort of archaic idea that Beck was interested in reviving, where he was very sort of intrigued by this kind of callback to, this sort of ragtime era culture of popular music that was much more participatory, that was much more open to reinterpretation and reinvention by a mass audience. And his sense was that it had really kind of parted ways from the broad stream of popular music and popular culture. And somehow unexpectedly, it actually came back while we were working on this book. And suddenly there were, many thousands or tens of thousands of people out there who sort of intuitively understood how to interact with this content, I suppose. And what it did was really obviate a lot of the legwork of trying to tell people what to do with this thing and try to make them understand how to engage with it and interact with it. And there was immediately this cultural conversation that just allowed that to happen much more naturally, which very happily and surprisingly allowed us to see that book travel in all sorts of different directions and become a sort of digitally enabled interactive project and become a series of live events built around sort of other interpretations of the book. And we saw people turn it into off-Broadway musicals and chamber music performances and all sorts of things. And it really sort of ran circles around any other project we've ever attempted in that way, and especially in terms of the kind of length of the movement across that spectrum from this very sort of odd extreme of packaging into something that was much more fluid and multivalent, which was fun.
That's really interesting, because that's repurposing at actually the user level, which is something that is really hard to do. And people were driving that on their own. So that's actually kind of an awesome grassroots moment right there.
Yeah.
I want to do that. I know we probably have to move on to the next question soon, but there is one thing we haven't actually talked about much, except for in your intro, Kris, is the code piece of this too,
Yeah.
which I take this for granted now, but the design team that I manage, we use Sass as a preprocessor for all of our CSS, which, if anyone's wondering, means syntactically awesome style sheets, and that's its real name. I didn't name it that. But it lets us isolate our code out into partials, which is basically little code snippets you can drag and drop from project to project with one line of code. It also lets you create a settings file, which can dictate the color, the font type, the font size, literally all the basics of a book in one file. So you change it in one place, that change will ripple across your whole book. And that's what we've done ever since we've isolated our core ebook styles into one set of partials. And then anything we want to add on or make experimental, we kind of just slide in there and test it out with the core. And it cut our development time by, we went from 50 hours to 25. So actually literally in half.
Yeah, that's great.
Because we were hand coding everything. If anyone's had to write the same CSS 50 times in here, you feel my pain. So it was a good thing. And find and replace for colors is something I never want to have to do ever again. But
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, SAS is amazing.
All right, I have just one project to share that Learner's been pursuing. We've been more focusing on repurposing content internally, but we realized that because our list is so heavily nonfiction and skewed towards the school library market, that there was a lot of content just sitting there that is not going to change pretty much, like biographies or it's my best example, biographies. So we did some research probably about a year ago into databases that purchase third-party content, and we found success with several of them, mostly science-based and biographies, because we have a pretty heavy backlist, but there were also things like crafts and DIY stuff, and medical, just huge amounts of things. And while doing the research, we pinpointed certain series or certain brands that were very heavy, so we targeted our niche areas where we knew we had a lot of content, where there would be a lot of interest. And so far, we've seen pretty good success with that. We're going to keep pursuing that as well. And the really nice part about this was almost all of the databases didn't want XML, which we've poorly been trying to implement so far. They all wanted EPUBs or raw text files. So it was a really easy way just to give them the stuff, and they figured it out on their end. So it's like free money, guys. All right, let's move on. I feel like maybe we already talked about this, but where has your company found the most success with repurposing content?
Yeah. I know Adams Media had long been doing repurposing of content before even the CMS became a thing there, and they had owned basically all of the recipes outright. And so anytime there was a trend going on that they would learn about, they could instantly well, not instantly obviously, but they could grab together all of this content and package it and say, oh, here, I think the Game of Thrones cookbook, they made the unofficial version as soon as that was coming out.
That's fantastic.
So it's like you're just tracking all these trends, and you're like trying to get ahead of that with this like, you know, this big backlog of sort of assets that you have is, you know, all of this recipe content that you own outright. So I think a lot of what they've done is, you know, sort of being able to be nimble and streamlined and like grabbing trends, you know, following them and trying to get things to market right away. But yeah, I think the CMS really helped sort of speed a lot of that stuff along, and certainly all of the repurposing they were able to do with the XML feeds to Kroger, that'll probably be something they can leverage for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think for my use case is slightly different because I'm usually the one helping people get to the point of repurposing. I think generally speaking, working with teams who have an idea of the end state that they want, with the end readers or users in mind, like what does that look like for them? How does it work? But is flexible on how we get there is usually the best and most successful versions we have, because we have the room to kind of try new things and say, well, what if we did it this way, which isn't quite what we wanted, but will get you the same end result. That opens up a world of possibilities for us to help others, and really talking to someone with an opinion, and a consistent opinion at that, is wonderful. Like that actually enables us to go twice the distance.
I mentioned the McLean's archive has huge value for us, and I don't think we've found the end to what we can do with that. So we also have Chatelaine, which dates back to the 40s. So we have these two very different brands telling Canadian history from a completely different lens. So those two pieces have a lot of value for us. I spent time when we were really focused on ebooks, diving into the Chatelaine archive, and just found Alice Munro pieces that she wrote before she was famous. Just really, really valuable content inside the pages of this magazine that hadn't been opened in decades. So looking back in your legacy content, if there is a long legacy, can be a really good resource.
Yeah, well, so just thinking in terms of these projects I mentioned earlier, I think creatively, certainly, I look at that collaboration as being the sort of most successful shot at this, especially in terms of taking, you know, I mean, I think of it in terms of taking the same basic DNA, these 15, 18 songs that he had written, and transforming them into pretty radically different containers, and really, I think, trying to take each of those containers to their own sort of artistic experiential limits. That was a really fascinating process for us, and strategically, certainly, I think this Audible partnership has taken first place only in terms of really allowing us to conceptualize, you know, a sort of very disparate, splintered kind of archive of stories and really sort of seeing it holistically for almost the first time in our history, and seeing ways to pull things together from across these different little islands they lived on for so long. That continues to be a really useful thing for us.
Our most success so far has been with audiobooks. Part of why we were able to move so fast on them is because we convinced the higher-ups, we're not convinced, but showed the higher-ups that audiobooks are trending right now. Like, there's a huge uptick in sales, and so we didn't want to miss that. So the content was already there. We just needed to grab it out and hand it off to Audible and iTunes and other distributors. It's only been up for 2 or 3 months, and we're having huge success. So it's definitely repurposing your content while being aware of trends seems to be what people are saying up here. All right, let's move on. Some of you have already touched on this a bit. How did you initially approach repurposing content at your company? Like, what was your very first project? Did you purchase software right away? Did you look at other companies? Did you set up some sort of management system? Or did you start with spreadsheets, which was my experience?
I got put on we call them tiger teams, which is a fascinating name. I just think of the Tony the Tiger cereal, where we were essentially an incubator that had to develop this prototype for repurposing and dividing courses. So I got some brain space to just deal with it outright with a team that included an engineer and a content strategist. I will say, if you do need to make a big shift and you can isolate a few people and kind of give them the brain space to figure out what the next step is, it's actually a really powerful tool. It's not everybody's workflows and or workload can take that on, but where it is accessible, it's awesome.
Yeah, I think for us, it would have been about 4 or 5 years ago now, we knew we really needed to move into the digital space, and that sort of had a lot of arms. We knew we had to create a replica edition of our print magazine, so they spun up a team of developers and great nerdy folk who sat in a room and built a platform in order to do that, and then they later moved to DPS, which is a much easier way to handle that kind of publishing. And then, an ebook program, which is how I started working at Rogers Media in the first place, was to head up an ebook team. It was just a very small group of us. There were 4. We worked with Laura Brady for quite some time to help us get spun up. And I think we were up and running in about 3 months and publishing titles. And then after that, it just, it was kind of a fire hose once you sort of move into the digital space and realize how many platforms there are out there to get into. It's been, you kind of move madly off in all directions trying to get in there. Yeah.
Everyone's so polite up here.
Yeah. It's the Canadian influence. I think, what was the question? It's like about the tools.
Like
and
how you
stuff?
first approached
Oh, how we first,
repurposing content, yeah.
The CMS, well, I mean, as far as my entrance into it, Adams Media had been doing this for a long time, and Colleen Cunningham was really instrumental in sort of developing that part of the workflow for the CMS. But basically, the CMS is like where I think a lot of things just started to take off with content repurposing, and then that sort of understanding how to best leverage all of that metadata that we didn't have yet for some stuff. And yeah, I think that's how we approached it. It's a lot of it's difficult to get people to rethink how content works, but Adams was sort of halfway there. And the difficulties in getting a CMS workflow implemented when everybody's very used to print and locking everything in an InDesign file. It's daunting, but they were pretty on board basically the whole time. But yeah, that's how we approached it. A lot of communication, sort of getting everybody to understand that this is important. This is a way to sort of think ahead. Future-proof a lot of the stuff that's sort of locked up. That you can't get to in your backlist, and making sure that doesn't happen in the future.
I am gonna have to cut you off. Apparently our timer's not working and we have like a minute left.
What?
So rapid fire, everyone, tips, tricks, go. How do it?
Plan ahead. Be as consistent as possible. Hold your team to being consistent. Keep in mind the impact it has on authors in particular. They become very specialized and isolated, and it winnows the number of authors. And I would also say, actually read the repurposed content when put together too, to make sure it still makes sense.
Yeah.
For sure.
I would say make sure your content is in one place where you can find it, and carve out space in your organization where you're investing in people who know how to help you get that content and build that knowledge in-house. It's really valuable, and we still don't know all the places we're gonna publish and all the places we'll go. It's my Dr. Seuss reference for the day. So, really focus on making that a priority and valuing those sets of skills in your organization that they'll take you far.
Rights, get the rights, and be fair to your authors.
Do I have time for a
Yeah,
tip?
you got 5 seconds.
Talk really fast. I think we've found, there are particular strengths in each format, and we've been happiest and I think most successful when we're really trying to make the effort to take advantage of exactly what we're doing in each lane, and thinking about why a book is a book, why an ebook is an ebook, and so on.
Yeah. I would say nurturing a workplace and an environment where new ideas, even no matter how crazy they are welcome, so you can pick up on new ideas. All right, thank you guys very much.